Hello all. Welcome to this vast last webinar that's about distilling values from people to AI and back. And we're having today with us Dr. Katie Evans from IEEE, Dr. Nicolas Stefanovitch from JRC of the European Commission, Alexandros, Nousias, and myself from NCSR Demokritos. We're going to start with a brief introduction to VAST, and then we're going to go on with our invited speakers and our talks. So, as I said, my name is Maria Dagioglou. I'm a postdoc researcher at the Institute of Informatics and Telecommunications at NCSR Demokritos, and for the past years, we have been working on VAST, Values Across Space and Time, which is a Horizon 2020 project funded by the European Union. Let me tell you a couple of things about VAST. VAST is a project that has aimed to study the transformation of values across space and time and bring them to the forefront of advanced digitization through the analysis of collection of intangible assets that are expressed in natural language and come from different places and from significant moments of European history. Through capturing and digitizing how values are conveyed today and how the audiences are experience and perceive the communicated values, and this is values in the present. So our motivation has been to actually relate cultural artifacts to values as perceived by people, and in this way to further support activities in research, education, citizen-informed curation, and so on. VAST across its journey has developed methodologies for capturing values, tools for digitization, and also has designed a semantic graph over artifacts and integrating conceptual schema to put all this information together. We are a consortium of these partners that you see here. And although VAST has its grounding in the field of cultural heritage, of course, values are everywhere, and everywhere around us. They guide our decisions, our choices, and during our VAST journey, we have identified and crossed paths with several activities related to values. As a result, we have started transferring and exploiting our knowledge and experience into the field of AI and AI ethics. That is a part of our work here at the Institute of Informatics and Telecommunications at the NCSR AD. And this has brought us to this webinar today. And as I said, that is the last of VAST. In terms of webinars, as our project finishes in 3 days. And again, that's the webinar. And without further ado, really, I would like to give the floor to Katie and her talk about what's in the value, understanding the normative structure of ethics in technology. Thank you. Enjoy.
Okay, let me just get myself organized here and then put it in presenter's view. I think perhaps everyone can hear and see me. So we should be good to go. Great. Okay, so yes, hi, my name is Dr. Katie Evans, or Katherine Evans. I am a moral philosopher and an expert in the ethics of AI. I'm a consultant at the IEEE and for some other actors in the AI ecosystem, but for the purposes of today, let's say the IEEE. I have a very dense talk, so let's jump into it right away. Okay, so I'm going to do a little overview of what I want to talk about in the next 20 to 22 minutes, if I've timed it right. So first, I'll talk about what's in a value, so what a value actually is, a little bit about values in the real world, how we might have heard about them, and then also some definitions to help us understand from a more formal philosophical perspective what values are. And then I'll talk about values in the context of ethics. So there's one really scary, dense slide in my presentation. I'm warning you now. And it's about the structure of an ethical theory. So we're going to go through it in 5 minutes or less. And the good news is while it's complicated and intimidating, once we get through it, you'll all have a master's level understanding of moral philosophy. So congratulations in advance. And of course, I'll talk about some of the upshots of seeing ethics from this structural perspective and how values fit into that, because I think that it might help clear up some of these perennial issues in AI ethics about, differences in values, cultural, moral relativism, these sorts of things. And then finally, very briefly, I'm going to address values in AI systems, specifically through the lens of what we can take away from the IEEE certified's approach to the assessment or the ethical assessment of AI systems. So once we understand the structure of a moral theory, I'm going to talk about how an organization, when developing, deploying, or using AI, should be reasoning about ethics and values and how we look at that in assessment, but very briefly. Okay, so let's jump into it. So obviously, we talk a lot about values in the AI ecosystem. In fact, I think a lot of the ethical debates that we have right now, of which there are many in AI, always have some type of value-laden vocabulary in them. So obviously, values are essential to understanding the ethics of AI, and we talk about them a lot. Some examples, in any given conversation, you can hear something about societal values. So, I don't know what society seems to value, human values, what humankind values, corporate values, what an individual organization might value, European values, right? So what, the European ethos might value, and also what would underpin legislation like the EU AI Act or the European conception of fundamental rights. You have design values, so things that seem to matter when we're designing an AI system, personal values, things that matter to us. And then we also have all of these sort of value concepts in the AI ecosystem, something like incommensurable values. So the idea that values are not all on one common scale, but rather are sort of an apple and orange and pear and banana approach, right? So each value is not directly reducible to another, or we can't just trade them off. We have the idea of implicit or explicit values, so that when acting or speaking or interacting, we emulate values implicitly, but also sometimes explicitly. I think we're going to talk about that some of my colleagues will address it later from the looks of the presentation. So more about that. Then we have this question of value alignment in AI. Can AI align with our values? What would that look like? Is it possible? Or value awareness. How do we even know what values matter in a deployment context? Value conflict, what to do when we can't satisfy two values that seem to matter in a context. And then, of course, ethical values, which, I guess it's a special subset of values, but frankly, I think all values are ethical, so it's sort of a misnomer. So like I said, lots of different ways to talk about values. Everyone seems to care about them. They even play out in some of these dilemmatic decision-making things like the ethics of driverless cars. Do you value the life of the young or the preservation of the elderly and wisdom? These sorts of terrible trade-offs. How do we handle them? But for all of our talk on why that values are important, I don't think we talk about enough about what they actually are. So let's do that now, from a philosophical perspective. So I think there are three sort of easy ways to describe what values are, which I'll walk through with you right now. So the first is that a value is something that's worth pursuing or having for its own sake and not for some other reason. So in more formal speak, this is the distinction between an inherent and an instrumental value. So for instance, the pursuit of knowledge is valuable in itself. We know knowledge is useful for many other things, but we pursue knowledge or scientific progress, for instance, just for its own sake. We don't use it as a means to some other end. Whereas instrumental values are the means to this end. So things like money or wealth, while they're valuable, are not values in a sense, because all they do is afford us the means to achieve other ends, like happiness, like pleasure, like comfort, etc., etc. So it's important to note that when we speak specifically about ethical values, they have this inherent nature. So they're not instrumentally valuable, they're just valuable in their own right. I think another distinction that we can make is that values direct or restrict the actions of human beings in social contexts, right? So what I mean by that is, if we adhere to a value, if we respect a value like honesty, it's going to affect how we behave in social contexts. For instance, we'll never want to tell a lie. And this might prove problematic or very difficult, for instance, if, as a famous philosophical example would put it, a serial killer walks up to you and asks you where your sister is, right? If you are really committed to the value of honesty, you'll tell them, even if in practice that may not be the best idea, right? So when you have a commitment to value, it affects your decision making, and it affects how you treat other people. A side note to that is also that it's not just ideals or values or ends that constitute values, but also people or some entities have inherent value as well, right? And this is sort of the other side of the value question in morality. So we can talk about this like a moral push and pull. So as an entity like a human being, I have inherent moral value, and maybe other things do too, like the environment or some sentient animals. And this again curves the way that I can treat these entities in my interactions with them. So if I think that the environment has inherent value, I shouldn't be littering all the time. I should be careful of how I use non-renewable resources, because if not, I would not be respecting the inherent value of this entity. I wouldn't be respecting the value of the planet, for instance. So again, this sort of, the values sort of shape the tapestry of morality in a context. And then finally, values obviously underpin morality and ethical theory. And I'll get into that in my very complicated slide in a big way, but just to understand preliminarily that ethics and ethical theory is nothing without values. Values provide the normative content from which ethics and ethical reasoning and ethical actions spring. Okay, so with that, let's get to the really complicated slide. Okay, so let's talk about this slide a little bit. So what I've done here is lay out the structure of an ethical theory, right? So we have a tendency to talk about ethical theories sort of in conjunction with values. So we'll say, oh, you know, utilitarianism or consequentialism, deontology or Kantian ethics, maybe virtue ethics. So we have these like major ethical schools when we talk about AI ethics. Then we also have this whole discussion on what values seem to matter in a design context. And it's not always clear how these two ideas interact. So this should maybe help this. Okay, so essentially, most ethical theories, especially rationalist ethical theories, so a lot of the ethical theories that have come out of the last 300 years, let's say, have this structure, this four-part structure. So I'm going to walk through this now. So at the very basic level, or what's called the foundational level, you have just basically the approach to what matters ethically, right? So this is just, you know, what ethics is about according to this theory. So is it about maximizing outcomes, right? Like a consequentialist perspective, or is it about respecting rules and duties, which would make it more deontological or Kantian? Is it about having virtual dispositions? And then it would be about virtue ethics, right? So this is the baseline of an ethical theory, because it just shows you what approach you're going to have when you're moving into a decision context, for instance. Next, and the most important layer for our purposes here, you have the normative level, right? So these are the normative factors that seem to matter in according to the theory, right? So if I care about maximizing outcomes, then I would care about the values that would address outcomes. So a classic example of this is utilitarianism, right? Which maximizes the utility or the welfare of every individual, either on the planet or that's affected by the decision, right? So in the case of utilitarianism, what's interesting is that there's only one value that matters, and that's welfare. Everything else you could care about, you know, transparency, bias, fairness, privacy, or even trust, autonomy, honesty, duties, friendship, all of that doesn't matter. It's just about welfare, right? Which is why tangentially, I have an issue sometimes when we use utilitarian logic in AI ethics, because I feel like, you know, obviously in a lot of human social contexts, many values matter, right? But if I was more of a deontologist, right, if I was more Kantian, then I would also think, okay, maybe welfare matters, but probably also duties and responsibilities to other people, right? And so in that sense, that also, like values like honesty, reciprocity, will start to feature in my moral reasoning as well, right? And so they exist at this normative level. I think informally, when we talk about AI ethics, what we're really doing is a third type of approach, which is called contractarian. And the basis of this idea is just that ethics is about acting on agreed upon principles. So you act on principles that everyone that's affected by the decision would approve of, right? And so in that sense, the values that matter to a contractarian are the values that everyone in the decision context holds. So when we talk about values in design, for instance, I think this is often the approach that we take rather than, a utilitarian or deontological or even a virtue ethics approach. So on another talk, on another day, I would make that argument a bit more strongly, but just to mention it here. So anyways, so once we have the foundational theory, so how we approach ethics, and then the values that matter according to that approach, we also have to have a decision procedure, which is basically just a way to reason about the values, right? So for instance, in the case of utilitarianism, we have to evaluate the welfare of each individual that could be affected by an action option, right? Whereas if I'm a deontologist, I have to look at if I have any special rights or obligations that I have to respect when I'm deciding what to do. If I'm a contractarian, I should try to figure out what principles or what action options no one could reasonably object to, right? Everyone would be okay or accept this action option. And so that's sort of what it is to have a decision procedure. And then finally, this last little pinnacle of the pyramid is called a criterion of rightness. And this is just something that helps you know what action to choose. So across many actions, which one is the best action or the most ethical action. And in that sense, utilitarians would say, maximize the general welfare. Deontologists would probably say, well, do that action that breaks no rules. And a contractarian, again, would say, well, let's choose that action option that offends no one, right? So that, in a nutshell, is the structure of an ethical theory. And as you can see, we can mix and match, the foundational level, the normative level, and then as a result of that, the decision procedure and the criterion of rightness. The only other point that I want to make on this slide is this idea of morally relevant features. And this is particularly interesting to consider in the AI case. Again, another talk on another day. But the idea of morally relevant features is just the facts that are morally relevant to my decision. So what I should consider in my ethical reasoning, right? So for instance, the fact that if I choose option A, people will lose their jobs, or the fact that, Y is my sister, and so maybe I have special obligations towards my sister, some type of loyalty, for instance, or the fact that Z is homeless, and so, could greatly benefit if I choose to do something that would, there's lots of welfare that he could gain as a result of my ethical decision, these sorts of things, right? So when you're deciding about ethics in a context, these facts matter greatly because it helps you understand the actual, moral landscape of what you're deciding from a factual perspective. Okay, so this is the complicated slide. We've made it through. Very briefly again, foundational theory is the approach to ethics, normative factors, the values that match that approach, decision procedure, how to reason about the values, and the criterion of rightness, what action's best according to all of this stuff. The morally relevant features, what are you looking at in the context that helps you decide from a factual perspective? Congratulations, you're all moral philosophers. So why am I telling you all of this? Because this is quite complicated for a general talk. There's a couple of points that I want to make here. So I think if we have a structural understanding of ethics and ethical theories, a couple things become clear. So first, ethics and values go in hand. So there is no dichotomy or tension between ethics and values. In fact, ethics is nothing with values, because if you remember the pyramid, if there's nothing in that normative layer, you have nothing to reason about, nothing to look at, and no action to choose, right? So values are at the very heart of how we reason ethically as human beings, either formally or also, I would say, practically in everyday common sense moral reasoning. The next point I want to make is a big one, and that's that famous ethical theories like Kantian ethics and utilitarianism, some of the examples that I just used, are not anything special. They're not, absolute ethical closed systems, but rather they're just specific configurations of this structure, of this pyramid, right? And so they are popular, but not authoritative, right? And so what that means is we don't, as technologists, when reasoning about ethics, we don't owe any loyalty to these traditional theories. It's just that there's lots of, philosophical reasoning and work that's been done to clarify what they mean in practice. But really, this pyramid can be organized to reflect sort of anything we want. And I think AI ethics, as it matures, should take that in stride. So my third point would be AI cannot reason about value, but AI developers, designers, and deployers can, right? And so I think as AI practitioners, it behooves us to make sure that in the ethical reasoning that we perform in the AI ecosystem, that we try to address as many values as possible so that we don't, for instance, take a utilitarian approach and say only welfare matters, but that we try to figure out from a more contractarian perspective, like I was saying, all the different values that could be pertinent to all of the individuals that are affected by, for instance, the deployment of an AI system, right? Because what that does is it ensures that the AI system's resultant behavior or impact matches the moral expectations of its end users or stakeholders, right? And that's how you get to things like acceptable and trustworthy AI, because the AI is aligning with values, right? And finally, the fact that people have different values is thus not a challenge to AI ethics. It is challenging to understand what values matter in what context, what we would call maybe the process of artificial moral uptake, which again is another talk. But the fact that we can mix and match in this pyramid and ensure that all of the values that seem to matter means that this sort of deciding which values matter in the outright for the entire planet thing, and since there's no such thing as universal ethics, well then ethics fails and doesn't matter. I think that argument seems a little bit hollow, right? Looking from a structural perspective, because if we can abandon our allegiance to traditional moral theory and just use its structure how we want, to repurpose it for the technology context, then there's no reason we can't accommodate whatever values exist in the deployment context of an AIS. All right, and so with all of that, very briefly, I just want to address values in AI systems from how we talk about this at the IEEE within the IEEE Certified Assessment Program. Okay, and so you can recognize this pyramid again. You can see that you have sort of the foundational layer, the normative layer, and then this decision procedure. Obviously, there's no criterion of rightness in this case, because here we're trying to assess how an individual organization has reasoned in the past tense about ethics in the design, deployment, development, AI lifecycle of a specific AI system, and also the organizational governance of the organization itself, right? So we're looking at the overall ethical conduct of an organization. And so in this sense, we're not making an individual decision. But in any case, the way that we approach this in certified looks very similar to the structure of an ethical theory. So I'll walk through this quickly. So basically, at the very base, we take a look at the ethical posture of the organization, right? So these are things like corporate values, public ethics policies, stated values and purposes, and intended benefits of the AI system, right? Because I think it's fair to say that a lot of AI practitioners, when they're developing AI systems, for instance, they have some positive value in mind that they're trying to promote, like well-being, like health, like some type of SDG, for instance, right? And they also have corporate values, so things like an adherence to protecting the planet and biodiversity, or to a circular economy type stuff, right? So these things matter in an ethical assessment because it shows the ethical posture of an organization. And so we discover this in the preliminary phases of assessment by talking to a lot of the different stakeholders within the organization, right? To develop what we would call a case for ethics. But then we also look at the values that are affected by the AIS's specific design. So the way that the AI system is designed will have a positive, but also perhaps a negative impact on the values in its deployment context, right? So we discover this through an exercise called profiling, which is where an assessor sits down with a bunch of other experts internal to the organization and discusses how the AI system behaves in specific use cases. The idea being that we're trying to discover the total set of values that could be affected by this AIS, right, by this AI system. And then we understand, as the basis of assessment, sort of the ethical profile of the AI system in question. So that's the basis of the ongoing assessment. Finally, then we have the practices, policies, and design choices, which, similar to a decision procedure, just looks at how the organization has reasoned about the values impacted by the AI system and the corporate values and the AIS's purpose in practice, right? So, you know, whether the AIS respects values in its life cycle, or whether the organizational culture actually supports ethics. And then finally, in terms of morally relevant features, right? So these facts that seem to matter in context, this is the facts and evidence considered in assessment. So, you know, how can you reasonably prove that you have adhered to your own corporate values, that you have considered the values that your AI system impacts both positively and negatively in design and governance? Well, it would look like things like adequate record keeping, existence of redress or whistleblower mechanisms, accountable hierarchical structures, whatever. So this is sort of the evidence that we look for in assessment to make sure that the ethical profile that we've discovered is actually honored in practice. But essentially, what we can see here is that the more that an AI practitioner or an organization has considered values in all stages and structures of its actions, so whether the AI system itself, but also its organizational governance, the more ethical the AI system that it's deploying, for instance, will be. And so the better the IEEE certified assessment will go, right? And so in a nutshell, values matter both in a human lens, but also as we start to move more and more AI systems into our practical everyday interactions, because they're interacting in value-laden contexts. And so they must be sensitive to the values inherent in those contexts, both from a technical perspective, but also from a governance perspective. And with that, I think I have finished my presentation and happy to take any questions. I know that was a lot to digest. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kate. It has been a real pleasure, as always, hearing you. I see we have a question here in the chat, and if more people want to pop questions, please do so. So the question is, why do you think that it will bring our humanity further when we use AI? Pretty philosophical, I suppose.
Deeply philosophical question. Another distinction maybe that I'll make. I think that AI is really good in preventing harm. You know, we can use AI to improve the lot of humanity, to reduce suffering, right? So what I would call negative ethics, the ethics of reducing harm. I think AI, though, is dangerous when we try to use it to benefit things, to pursue specific axiologies, to try to get society to organize around certain principles, right? So while we think that we're maybe improving society by building AI systems, for instance, that cause particular communities that have historical conflicts to interact, that sounds like a good idea because we could bolster diversity and inclusivity, right? But there's the risk of being paternalistic, right? So the idea that that we're making choices for other people in their stead. And the issue is that technology has a tendency to do that very quickly and at scale, right? Because we make one decision and then it's implemented at scale for many, many different people, often without their explicit consent and knowledge, right? So I think that AI has a great potential to reduce the suffering of a lot of different people when we design it for that purpose. Although I'm worried that if we try to use AI for this sort of techno-moral solutionism, so to improve, for instance, the ethical behavior of humans, or to improve on what we think is the right way to organize society or the right good life, then I'm not sure it's such an improvement, because it significantly risks undermining human autonomy, which is probably one of the most important principles in this space.
Thank you, Kate. Let me check if there are more raised hands or questions in the chat. I see none, so we might go on with Nicolas' presentation, and I believe we'll have also some time at the end to recap. Thank you so much. And I'm going to give the floor to Nicolas Stefanovitch to talk to us about experiments on automatic extraction of values from texts. Nicolas, thank you. Alexandros, he's a colleague of mine here at NCSR Democritus. And he's going to talk about from open source to values-based responsible AI licenses. Alexandros.
Okay. So thank you, Maria. Thank you all. We've heard two very interesting talks that are very much linked together, and I'm going to somehow attempt to bring this to the table of the end user. And when I'm talking about end users, I'm talking about recipients of AI assets and artifacts. So how we provide these artifacts to the research or the commercial or the corporate world. Usually we do it in a contractual way or in a one-to-many model, which is about more or less about licensing. So when we're talking about the licenses, basically, hang on a second. Yes, when we're talking about the licenses, we need to think of a license as a carrier of norms, as a carrier of a set of values, usually of the provider of the AI artifact, and informed use restrictions that provide specific restrictions to the end users as they have been defined. And that this can be an individual end user, a group, a community. Let's say the open source community and the sub-communities are a great example on that. And there's a social trade-off, because as Katie also said, when we talk about values, values are the starting point for our decision-making process. So the way we frame this set of elements that define and delineate a value is very important for the downstream users of the AI artifact. We have learned a lot of lessons from the open source software world and the way things have been licensed throughout these years. Just a very brief recap on what this spectrum is about. So we moved from the all rights reserved status to the some rights and the no rights reserved domain that was introduced. So we had this shift from exclusive copyrights to some rights reserved, introduced basically by Creative Commons and Lawrence Lessig. So we try to identify how we could exploit to the maximum the allowances and the freedoms that this open licensing schema have offered to the world. And we saw that the basic open source software behavioral restrictions are usually geographical. They have to do with the downstream users, especially when we talk about the so-called permissive license, which means that you provide an artifact subject to the term that this artifact will be used further under the same clauses, and restrictions regarding derivatives to create a derivative work or not. But this in the AI world seems not so complete, in the sense that a lot of contextual issues come at play, and there are a lot of issues that the open licensing schema do not deal with. And the reason for this is that in the open source world, everybody, the stakeholders, the members of the community were they were sharing the same value set, they were sharing the same objectives, regardless of the objectives of each project per se. However, they were operating on common ground. So the missing point here is the responsibility aspect. And the reason we say this is because we see some kind of tensions and trade-offs. So when we talk about the openness trade-off in the AI world, we could visualize it like this. First of all, we have the trade-off. We actually allow through the license the downstream users to use the artifact. However, what we are making sure is to have the end user actually respecting the intellectual property rights of the licensed material. So this was the main and the core objective of the open licensing scheme. However, what we want to do here is that we have identified a different, let's say, polarity, and this has to do with a responsibility trade-off. And in a nutshell and in a very high level, this refers to what we call context agnostic downstream users or context specific ones. So if we in the event we simply follow a typical open licensing scheme, we are not defining the context at all. We are not defining any specifics for the potential downstream users, and this may bring many things at risk. So we opt for a licensing scheme where the when, what, and how of the downstream users is somehow delineated in order to make sure that contextually speaking, the licensed material is operating in a right way. I'm not using terms like ethical. I'm not using this kind of issues. I'm just saying that the licensor is the one that somehow needs to frame the context in which the downstream users are allowed to operate regardless the final objective. So we can see there is an apparent tension between openness and responsibility, and this is very obvious and very interconnected in the sense that we have identified cases where openness is absolutely satisfied. The openness requirements are absolutely satisfied. However, there is an absolute gap regarding the responsibility aspect of the downstream users of the AI artifact. So what we're trying to do via this open and responsible AI licensing schema is to mitigate risk of harm from tech and at the same time reinvent open. Because if you look at it in a more careful way, you will see that we are actually adding an extra layer of licensing clauses that need to be respected in order to allow also openness to come at play. And of course, this is subject to the fact that the provider of the AI artifact is either the creator or the actual rights holder of the licensed material. We have some high-level examples of how the responsibility aspect has operated throughout the years, because it's not a new concept, it's not a new notion. However, it's the way it's going to be applied in the real world is something of great importance, and it requires a lot of creativity. Yes. So this is we saw in the JSON format that they had this requirement that the software shall be used for good and not for evil. We have identified requirements for downstream users of datasets per se. So this has to do with the concerns like under what license are we supposed to provide the dataset? Are we dealing with it on a case-by-case basis? Do we allow training for generative large language models? Do we use disclaimers? Or because we have seen that maybe sometimes disclaimers simply relinquish responsibility. So we have tested what we deem as responsible licensing in the AI world, and we took some examples. I have 3 examples here to present to you. We took 3 specific, I would say, normative frameworks. The one is the coming EU AI Act, and we will work on an example from the high-risk systems as per Annex 3, Montreal Data Declaration, and one very typical from the Altai, from the list for trustworthy AI. This is a very high-level attempt to bring this responsibility concerns in a licensing text. So let's suppose that we as data providers want to have some concerns, or we are driven from the power dominance value, let's say. And we take the example of the use case from the employment, workers management, and access to self-employment AI applications. So an example clause would look something like this: that the licensee will not use the licensed material in a manner that would profile or screen humans and/or manage workers or deny promotion. So this would somehow support the power dominance value, yes. As far as concerns the modular declaration framework, we picked up the integrity of one's personal identity that needs to be guaranteed. So a very simple license clause would look like this: the license material may not damage one's reputation. So this is driven from the lack of face value. And another scenario from the trustworthy AI from the Altai, regarding the requirement for diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. The example clause would look like this: the licensee will not use the licensed material in a manner that would profile or screen humans and/or restrict access to employment or promotion subject to their beliefs regarding women as managers, for example. So the universal concern is very apparent in this example clause. So what we have seen by these three very, very simple and high-level examples is that we try to introduce responsible use clauses, and in this way we try to reflect the values of the source, which in our case is the VAST platform, to the downstream users. And the way we do it is by reflecting or simulating in advance worst-case scenarios regarding the usage of the datasets of our datasets in specific contexts. Again, another example from this kind of contextualization of the licensing of software in this case. This example is from the Apache license, where there are a lot of usage restriction, and there is some kind of approach regarding responsibility. So it shifts from pure openness to responsible clauses. I understand that this is to much extent a very high level or very generic. However, we claim that this can somehow generate some kind of culture, at least among peer members or members of a peer network. Some examples regarding the usage of rights in conjunction with AI models, and this is from the Montreal data license template, where there is a lot of great job going on in this front, if I may say, where they have actually identified potential uses of data in conjunction with AI. The differentiating point here is the fact that they don't enter into contextualization in the sense of use cases, but they have a horizontal approach regarding the potential uses of data sets in the AI, in an AI application or use case. So if you see here, you have this rights to data. So this refers to the data as a standalone. So they provide the first layer of data usages, which refers to access, tagging, labeling, distributing and representing the data. And then they try to put the first, they bring a second layer where they introduce specific downstream uses, horizontal downstream uses, in conjunction with the AI models that will come at play. So if we try to visualize and bring this all to summarize what we have said so far in the vast context, we will see that we have identified our datasets as the licensed material. At the same time, we have cleared, let's say, any kind of intellectual property rights around the dataset. So we claim ourselves as the exclusive IP rights holders, and we grant to the licensee specific legal permission in order to enter into specific usages of the datasets provided. So the question here is, what kind of restrictions do we actually provide and impose to the downstream users? And the main, how can I say, the logic behind this licensing scheme is that we have at first instance, we have identified the values that we as an organization and as a platform opt to foster. At the same time, what permits do we provide? And we also try to somehow calculate the impact that we might generate by licensing these particular data sets. So what we're trying to do is to somehow make the tension between openness, to bring openness and responsibility licensing schema to the innovation aspect. So we understand, we try to bring together these two and to make sure that the way we address responsibility and the way it is combined with the openness, permissions, and restrictions that we provide in our licensing schema do not stifle innovation. Rather, they promote innovation, either in the research spectrum or in the commercial and the corporate world. In a way, I wouldn't call it ethical again, I would call it subject to the values that the data provider, which in this case is the vast platform, identifies its own value system. So the end goal of this approach is to actually create an open and responsible vast data governance scheme and network where the data is obtained from the people, brought to the AI and brought back to the people. So this network, in order to flourish and in order to make sure and ensure that you have legal and ethical compliance at the same time while not stifling innovation, is to actually create a network that shares this kind of approach. And at the same time, you have this elements checked, which these elements are the intellectual property rights, human rights. Of course, when we're talking about AI models and applications and AI output and system, we need to make sure that the licensing and the downstream users will also comply with the AI Act requirements and the liability directive, which means the whole AI regulatory package. Ethics, which goes over and beyond legal compliance. And following these, we allow research, we allow innovation, and we allow also market applications subject to the exercise, that needs to be made in advance in order to actually bring our artifacts to the AI world for research, innovation, and market applications that will ensure an ethical and responsible application realization, I would say. So I've put also here some references that will guide you through the concept of responsible and open AI licensing. And that was it for me, for myself.
Thank you very much, Alexandros. There is a question in the chat, very interesting. How do you enforce the licensing model? How do you address liability for open source AI?
This is a very nice question. And actually, the basic, the most plain answer that I can provide in this question is that we don't, because we cannot enforce an open licensing schema, let's say in Myanmar or in, I don't know, in North Korea or somewhere where there could be a totally different value system or a totally different approach, or even in a European country, let's say. So we aim basically at generating networks of common understanding, and we aim at creating a culture of responsibility when we talk about usage of datasets in the AI spectrum. However, of course, in a very technical, in technical terms, licenses are absolutely enforceable, and there are legal documents at the end of the day. So whether we opt for actually enforcing something will be also subject to a case-by-case assessment.
Also, IPR in standards is often considered under FRAD rules, fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. I'm sorry. How can we reflect your approach in it?
I'm reflecting the question, first of all. In standards often considered under, yes. Again, I think that this cannot be addressed horizontally, although we aim at horizontal licensing schema. However, especially the non-discriminatory aspect of the FRAND rules cannot be assessed apart from a case-by-case assessment. So in logistics, in a managerial way, I would see a committee or something that would assess whether these rules are actually satisfied in a case-by-case scenario. I cannot see any other way at this point. Yeah. Yes, I see a hand.
Yeah, there is a raised hand, Alexandros. Your hand, please.
Just sound. Okay,
Can
it's
you
enough.
hear
Yeah.
us, Joachim? You've been unmuted. You may proceed with your question.
Yeah, can you understand? It doesn't work.
We
Can you
can't
understand
hear
me?
you, I'm
No.
afraid.
Now sound is coming. You understand me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I want to talk because my question is a bit complicated. I'm quite convinced that aesthetics and arts play a big role. You know, that is the European Bauhaus thing from von der Leyen, and I think it's not active enough. I'm missing more aesthetics than ethics. And for example, like urbanism or medicine, as I already mentioned, because arts is a bit special, and I think the technical community have problems to integrate arts. Is there a way of licensing and dealing with it? Because for the cultural aspects of all what scientific community parts, I think art should be integrated more because it's effective, particularly in complex cases. Do you discuss this, how to deal with arts?
This is an excellent question, and actually you provide me an extra layer of consideration, because to be honest, I never thought of adding interpreting contextualization in terms of art. So we could definitely say that we provide our data sets for, let's say, Bauhaus limited applications, let's say. So I would see it in the same way. If our main how can I say concern would be the aesthetics, as you said, which I really like and follow, then why not assessing the candidate downstream users under these lenses and provide additional clauses that will somehow frame the aesthetical restrictions. I really like this concept, to be honest.
Thank you. Good to hear this. And maybe I try to follow you, what you are doing, and so, because I think Germany, I think is not strong enough. I think we need Europe to do these things.
Yes. To be honest, I really don't know the aspect at all, but I would be really happy to try to apply this kind of aesthetical concerns to this licensing schema. Really, it would be an interesting project, actually.
Alexandros, there is another question for you. How would you apply it in the context of generative AI art fakes? So I think
this is the $1 million question, Gilles. To be honest, nobody has actually provided a convincing answer on that. We could possibly simply say at the beginning that our data set cannot be used for generative AI at all, or for generative AI art at all, or they can be, somehow we can connect this to the previous comment and say, yeah, but I will skip the generative limitation. Actually, there's no answer here at the moment, Gilles, now that I'm reflecting to the question, to be honest. But if I see fakes, now that I see fakes to the, we could have an a posteriori approach on that, right? We could somehow try to ensure some kind of traceability models, audit trails, and try to identify whether fakes have been generated with the contribution of our data sets. This could be something. So in a technically speaking, I think that the traceability aspect and requirement is something that has a universal, how can I say, demand, and this is the only way that we could do this. Or use also smart contracts and blockchain techniques, but I haven't seen any kind of this kind of technical applications the last period of time.
Okay, there are no more raised hands or questions in the chat. So I suppose this is my time where I share my screen again. Okay. I hope you can all see my screen now. So this is the last talk of this webinar. I have changed the title a little since the advertisement of this webinar. So it's now Values Travel through AI, and it takes inspiration from a vast activity, Values Travel through Antigone. And in my talk, basically, the short stories, I'm gonna try to tell you how we integrated one of vast activities into an AI ethics course, but also why we did so, and what's the outcome of it. So very briefly, I'm gonna give you an introduction about the context in which we applied the vast activity, what is vast activity, and how we structured it in the context of AI ethics, and round up with some conclusions. So usually an AI ethics course will include or should include a definition of what is an AI ethics course, and perhaps the more easy approach, let's say, would be to refer to several frameworks such as the Altai, and explain what AI ethics is related to. It will include topics on data governance, regulatory frameworks, a bit of moral theories, like Katie's complicated slide, the alignment problem, AI assessment methods and tools. However, during designing an AI ethics course, and Alexandros and myself, and naturally been inspired a lot by VAST, we thought, by VAST also, and our experience being trained as IEEE certified assessors, so we thought values needs to come into the game, because when you ask people, when you start an AI ethics course and you ask them, oh, what are the 3 words that come to your mind when you hear the buzzword AI ethics, law comes as the most prominent word. So we thought, well, to our minds, values is the most important thing. And I could just skip this slide and refers to Kate's talk, but ethics is all about values, basically. We cannot consider ethics without values. And actually, if you think of responsible AI, it's related to at least 3 different dimensions: the ethical systems being built into the AI, the morality of the stakeholders and the users, and also the moral behavior of people around AI. And while the first bullet is sort of covered by the traditional topics one would hear in an AI ethics course, the second one, the morality of the stakeholders and the end users, it's not so much of a popular topic of discussion. In order to support the decision-making process of AI professionals, we decided that we need to talk about values. They need to be able to identify their personal biases. They need to be able to understand the values of the end users. So how to talk about values? That was the next question. We know we wanted to talk about values, but how talk about values to this group of people that have registered in masters to learn about AI methods and data science related topics? Well, the first thing that came to our minds was naturally let's plug in a vast activity into our course, and this is what the rest of my presentation will be about. But I would also like to mention that other ways to talk about values that we have also integrated in the course is to set up a common conceptual framework, a common code, a common language. So we introduce the SVARS values vocabulary and have people to understand the definitions of SVARS values and try to talk using this code. And we have related the assignments of the course with values annotation, other teamwork, and we have even included a visit to Island Lyceum, which is a digital exhibition when you can actually experience philosophy, and this is an exhibition that has been that runs in Athens and has been designed and supported by NCSR Demokritos and the Ministry of Culture. So with all this material, we want to talk to our students about values, and I'm gonna go directly and talk to you and give you some more details about a vast activity. So again, why a vast activity? Because ethics is an experience, basically. We can define diversity, respect, freedom. We can provide definitions that I'm sure all of us understand, but what it really means when we experience this concept. So we wanted really our students to experience diversity and create in this way a common ground for discussion for the entire course. We wanted to establish respect and tolerance during the discussion. AI ethics is a course where the discussions are really lively, and in this way we hoped to also develop the social soft skills of the participants that I think it has become very clear from all different topics today and in general are surrounding AI that AI professionals will be called to work in multidisciplinary teams. Naturally, this sort of activity that is introduced in the second class of the course also works as a icebreaker and encourages active participation, again, in a course that we really, really need it. So, what's the goal of our activity? This is how we present this in the class. So the goal of the activity is to really be able to understand the profile of the people we are talking to, of the people that are code whatever we develop and deploy ends up to. And we need to understand their values, we need to understand their diversity. And we also need to understand that what we see, what we perceive as the water coming out of a pipe, it can as well be a swan sticking its head into the pipe. So they need to be able to get the whole picture, the entire picture of their end users, of the involved stakeholders. So a VAST activity, as it has been designed during VAST project, has four structural components. The first one is the introduction to values. So during the break ice activities, we make sure we introduce what values are In this case, we want to also introduce the topic of diversity and provide a working definition of values to make sure that we talk about values and not about emotions or for character or for personal characteristics and so on and so forth. The next step is to introduce the cultural heritage artifact. And this is an important step actually, because this is our common stimulus. This is the grounding, the inspiration we need to move on to the next steps of the activity. Once the stimulus has been introduced, then we can do all sorts of activities to give time and space to people to self-reflect. So in our case, we ask people to annotate an expert from the chosen artifact and self-reflect on their values, perception. We then ask them to build a personal mind map and self-reflect on how they prioritize these values. And the last part of our structure, of our activity, comprises team mind maps. So people get into teams, they discuss their personal mind maps, and they are called to build a team mind map, one mind map that expresses the whole of the team. And as a very last step, we also adapt team mind maps and present to the entire class their group mind map, and we ask them to compare to their own personal mind maps, as well as to mind maps that are being created along the course of this journey with other groups. And let me present you the stimulus given our groups that are AI professionals. We thought it would be great to provide a really stimulating stimulus. That's Rossum Universal Robots, Karl Čapek's theatrical play that is the root of the word robot, the way we use it. So we briefly introduce the story to get them really into the background of the play, and then we start. We continue with the rest of our activity. So up to now, we have actually implemented these in the AI ethics courses we teach together with Alexandros, the Master of Artificial Intelligence and Data Science. They're both interinstitutional masters with NCSR Demokritos. 3 groups have already taken part in these activities, 68 students in total. And these are some pictures from the activities. Me and Alexandros being really excited before the start of our first activity. And then here are parts of our ice-breaking steps, and then you see it's again annotation, mind maps, team mind maps, and group mind map. And this is actually the outcome of one group. This is what people get to see at the end of this activity and get to reflect about how what they perceived in the play, this is always grounded to the same stimulus, what they have seen in the excerpt, and what they have perceived and what they have prioritized in their personal mind maps. How does this then compare with the entire group mind map? And things actually getting more stimulating and more interesting when you get to compare more groups. And the more we repeat this activity in all sorts of different groups, the more we can provide the feedback that, look, this is your group's mind map, but just take a look and see what other 2 groups have ended up to look how many different words are to be found in 3 mind maps. Again, these are all triggered by one excerpt of a play and 1 page excerpt actually. And look how many unique words its mind map has. And we can even provide further inputs to our participants to show them how many annotations are to be found in how many concepts have been related to these a very short excerpt of a narrative, how different personal mind maps compare in terms of prioritization of values, and how different teams prioritize values and concepts. And it might be that we have a lot of values in common, but we also have a lot of diversity across people and groups. I'm sorry. So I think it's overall a very well received activity within our course. The people provide a great evaluation, but it's some of the comments that really makes us happy and makes us feel that we have or we keep achieving one of our targets to make people self-reflect. So a student said, I had to answer questions about me that I had never considered before, and I believe this is great, especially if you think again the context in which this is provided, and it's again within an AI ethics course targeted to AI professionals. Naturally, as achievements, I would say that we have seen it in practice that this activity really works as a common experience that we all share in the class, and we can anchor to it anytime, and we need to anchor to it. There are many instances that we make links back to it, and we really establish a valuable approach across the course. People are really aware of diversity. They show respect to others' opinions, and we do really in this way have also a common communication code that facilitates our group discussions. And actually, when you ask people what are the three words that come to your mind after the end of the course, we are really happy to see that values are surfacing more prominently in this word cloud of words that relate to AI ethics. Naturally, there are some challenges as well. There is sometimes in every group some hesitation. Interactive activities all can put some people outside their comfort zone, and this is something we have to work with within the class. The approach is unexpected with respect to the overall content of the course. So we get once in a while comments like a more AI-oriented approach would have been nice. We try to integrate this as well over repetitions and improvements of the activity. And also, we have to consider the fact that values as a subject, as an academic subject, let's say, is not such a familiar topic with respect to our audience's background. And also, from our perspective, again, it really integrating such an activity demands a multidisciplinary approach that is really challenging many times. And I hope I was on time, but I couldn't say bye without acknowledging some people that have really helped with the activity and the analysis of the results. I would start from George Petasis, who is the VAST coordinator, Dora Katsamori, that is also calling here at NCSRD, and she's responsible for the design and implementation of VAST activities at NCSRD. You know, the guy next to Dora. I would also like to thank Dimitris Koutridze for helping us with data analysis, and a really, really big thank you to all our students that have been really great and have been supporting us in this effort to talk about AI ethics from a different perspective. Thank you all. And now I think I'm the one who should also check. Let me go back to my screen. Okay, I should stop sharing. Okay. Yeah, that would be all. Okay. Okay, there I'm gonna go through the questions or comments I see on the chat. So Jochen says that history is a delicate discipline which can contain pearls if the perspective is rich. That's it's a comment, but I would like to echo Jochen in saying that we have so much experience this in past, and during not only this specific activity that I have presented, but throughout all vast vast educational activities without the AI inside. I think we have scratched on this pearl called cultural heritage, and we have seen how stimulating it can be to use it in these sort of activities to talk about values. Yes. So I have a comment actually from Nicolas. Yes, Nicolas, it's really, I would really invite everyone to read the Ruhr. It's really an exciting piece of work, and I don't know why it's not a movie, but yeah, it's really an amazing work. And yes, Nicolas, we have a lot of annotations within Ruhr from our students that we can talk about. So I see no more questions or comments for this last bit of my talk. So I would like to invite Katie, Nicolas, Alexandros, perhaps to open their cameras. There is a question for Katie, a big one. So the question from Ellen is, I'm wondering if the loss or reduction of values due to the integration of technology, by example, reduced possibility to achieve or gain values or loss of more relevant entities, has been discussed in more details in philosophy / ethics of technology, ? Which frameworks or conceptual tools could developers or researchers apply to detect and discuss such value loss, reduction? Actually, this is 3 questions. Or how would a moral philosopher discuss the type of issue? There is a 4th question. You mentioned reduction in contextual affordances above. Maybe this is an answer. So that's a big question.
Thank you, Maria, for reading it. There was a bit of a sidebar conversation based on a previous question that I responded to in the chat. So I think that picks up on that. This is just the idea of affordances. So yeah, by affordances, I mean what a context affords to an actor. So it's super agnostic. We're not really talking about morality, but just the breadth of action options in a specific context. And so my claim earlier was that technology affects the affordances in a practical context, sometimes reducing them, sometimes modifying them, sometimes giving others, right? But a lot of times when it comes to ethical considerations on top of what action options we have, it has a tendency to reduce them because it accomplishes more practical tasks for us, right? That's part of the efficiency argument. So to answer this question, I don't think it's correct to say that there's a loss of morally relevant entities, right? Because, I mean, logically, whatever AI does, the entities that have moral relevance, like human beings, sentient creatures, maybe the environment, they'll remain valuable. I think it's right more to talk about action options, like I said, a loss of action options. And in this sense, there is some literature that touches on this. It's early where I am, so I don't have it like off the top of my head, I will say that my doctoral thesis discusses it because this is my approach, which is also why I use this term, not to plug it or anything, but it's on Google Scholar. So if you want to read 380 pages, you can go right ahead and do that, but I'm not suggesting it strongly. But basically it's based off of Gibson's theory of affordances in animal perception, which is a weird way to take it. But I think from a more practical perspective, the IEEE in our work in certified touches on this in the profiling phase, since we look at how the different modes of a given AI system impact a set of stakeholders, right? So in this sense, loss of options is a serious consideration that we take into account in profiling and also into the resultant criteria suites that we use for assessment. So from like a basic methodological perspective, it's considered by what we do in certified. So that's my IEEE response to that question. But I think a lot of times we can also see this topic crop up when we talk about AI personhood, which is kind of weird because it's sort of an upshot. We always talk about how AI is different from humans, you know, and that maybe we have to adjust our behavior towards it, you know, and also things like the ELIZA effect. So it's rarely, from what I've seen recently, treated as a question in the outright, besides my thesis, but it's often, it's kind of circling around other ancillary debates, especially because quickly from a moral perspective, what's interesting about AI agents in general is that they have no inherent moral value. So they have a lack of moral push. There's no reason for us to treat them in a specific way, right? Like morally speaking, we can treat them however we want. So if we do feel like we owe them certain things or they provide some sort of action affordance that looks like morality, it's because we want it to be there, not because it needs to be there from a moral perspective. So something interesting to consider, you know, there is no I in robot, in other words. Yeah.
Thank you. So I really need to ask Nicolas what he thinks about rule since he started reading this weekend.
It's very interesting because it's quite an old piece, but it's very actual in the themes it's taken. Well, you're a bit spoiled the end for me, but it's fine.
So I see no further questions, I think, and the one I had left for the end, I think you have already chatted about in the chat. No one was left for Katie, like okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I don't know, Alexandros, do you have any comment?
I think we start a new approach, if I may say, by actually trying to distill values in the final AI output. It's not an easy task. It's a dirty job, but somebody has to do it, as we say. So I wish us all good luck. Inspired by each one, by everyone.
However, before we go, there is a question for Katie. But it's already been replied to Jonathan. Yeah, okay, it's been taken care of by Kate. Thank you, Kate. So I would really like to ask Alexandros to mute his microphone. He's just sitting next to me. So, and I would really like to thank you all for being here and listening to us over the past almost 2 hours. And naturally, I would like to thank a lot Katie and Nicolas for accepting our invitation and being here and sharing with us all the great work and all their thoughts and actions in the field. I think Elena whispers something to me. I can't really. Sorry, what was that?
Just to let everyone know that the video will be online in the coming days as a follow-up to this webinar. Thank you.
Okay, so that was what was the whispers in my ear. Again, thank you so much all for joining, and I feel a bit emotional now because it's one of us final acts today. We're finishing up in 3 days, so but we are still producing things and updating our site and our platform. So if you want to keep up with what we do with values and cultural heritage, feel free to visit the VAST site. Thank you all. Bye.